What's going on, everybody? Super Tuesday.
Loving Boxwood.
Loving Boxwood. In the house with Rodney Clemons tonight. We've been waiting and waiting and waiting for Rodney to get here. We had a pandemic. You know how all that happened.
It's a long walk.
It's a long walk. It took him a while to get here,
Yeah.
but he made it, and it's time. And we've got something very, very special and impressive for you tonight in terms of what Rodney's going to share with us. So I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to assume the position in the chat. We're going to go through announcements, and then we're going to turn Rodney loose like a caged animal, because that's kind of how he rolls.
Yes.
All right? Okay, what do we got for, oh, that's right. So we've got Lonnie on the mic this evening.
Hello, hello.
And Josh producing the stream from the mothership. He's here. He's amongst us. Jesus on the detail. Woo! What's up, Jesus? And I am on the chat, which is abnormal, but I'll try not to screw things up too bad. Let's rock and roll, man.
All right. Well, this is quite an honor to work on a tree this good. It's been fantastic to pay attention to it today. Today's been a long day just playing with it, fondling the boxwood, and it's been fantastic. This is a big one for the Kingsville, for the Microphylla compactus, and so it's a pleasure to work on it. It's gonna be fun. I've got a large area, and with Kingsvilles, it's a lot of leaves. You're taking off a whole bunch of leaves, so it's a slow process. I'll go at it kind of the way I go usually, and that's kind of a progression of how I attack the tree or adjust it. And some trees think I attack, but really I'm pretty soft and gentle. But I'm looking at this tree. It's got a great base. I'm going to turn it around. What I've done is I've picked the side that's a little bit larger, a little bit rougher to do some of the pruning on tonight. But I've already worked a lot of it because I didn't have anything else to do here. And I wanted to do the back. So I'm going to show you the quality of this tree. And it's all about the trunk, this top. We're going to make it look a lot like a live oak, but we're going to start with it. And let me tell you, the base is incredible. So I'm going to spin it around, and look at that. Pretty impressive base. So this has been edited a little bit, opened up, so that you can kind of see what's involved in there. You can see that undulating branches, the movement that's in here. Fantastic. I'll be taking off some of the larger branches, not many, because the tree's really nice the way it is. Some of them cross each other. There's a spot here that the branches twist around each other, but it's fantastic. Trees do that naturally. They have this reverse taper. You got branches all coming out of the same spot. That's the way a live oak grows. Very natural for me. This is a tree that, as far as the live oak would go, I grew up in Florida. I would have sat here for hours and hours or put a tire swing off of it. It's a great tree. So we're going to come around, and I'm going to show you one of the things that about taking branches off on a boxwood. Very thin skin. Their cambium is very thin, heals very, very slowly. And so you make a cut that's a rounded cut, the way we've cut off things with our pruners and stuff. That cut is going to last for an awfully long time. This is an old tree, so that cut will last for years and years and years, and it gets like a bullseye. Your eye goes right to it. So if I'm going to take a big branch off, I'm going to make it look natural. The way to do that is just take a little aggression out and rip the branch off. And then the damage that's been done, there's a story there. It looks like, okay, this is what happened, you know, a limb hit. I like going to meteors. Meteors hit trees all the time. So, but I'm going to go, the one thing that's maybe something I'm going to be dealing with, it's not maybe, I will be, is this root that comes off over here. The tree's got a nicer shape without it, so that will come off. And that is a spot where it's right in your eye. So if you're, depending on how it's potted, that is going to be always very, very, very visible.
Can you show that to us? Can we see that? And just show, yeah, let Jesus, go ahead and rotate it towards Jesus and show him that, yeah, perfect.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, this is a funky one. Of all of these, now, I just want to give the background because I think a lot of people are asking, but these are Kingsville Boxwoods. that were planted. Oh, how old do you think this is? How old do you estimate this at?
It's tough because it was planted in the ground. If the plant was introduced to the nursery trade in 1912, and so it's no older than that.
Right.
But it's a good 60 plus years. 60 very conservative. You could go up from that.
Yeah.
It could easily be 80 to 100 years old.
So it was estimated at between 80 and 85 years because it was planted by the original proprietor at Shanty Bithy, which used to occupy the back cover of Bonsai Today. And when they shut down, they still had these in the field. And the last of them were dug. This was probably the biggest of them. We have 7 of them here at Mirai. This is by far and away the most impressive one, right? Rodney came in and lost his mind for a moment, just like, what?
Had to change my pants.
That's right. That's right. So, but when you talk about Kingsville, you said first Kingsville, 1912. What does that mean?
Well, Kingsville was a mutation, a sport that was spotted on a boxwood in Pennsylvania, and that sport was some shenanigans, maybe some horse trading went on, but Henry Holman was the one that got that, and he was the one that introduced it to the nursery trade. And this is where the name comes from, I think, Kingsville. His nursery was in Kingsville, Maryland, and it was called Kingsville Nursery. And so it's, that's sort of the start to it. But the thing is, it's a sport, it's a mutation, and this plant continues to mutate. So you get a lot of different forms of it. But Henry Holman called it Buxus microphylla compacta, and that's really what it should be called. But the Kingsville is one that, especially with the tinier leaves, this is a little bit of a larger leaf. Hence, one of the reasons it grew so nice and so large was it was a faster growing than the smaller variety of the Kingsville, but they're still all microphyllas that have that growth habit, and it's very nice. So besides the mass of this tree, one thing I liked about it, keep turning it to where you can see it, but this white color, that really jumps. And I meant to clean it up today a little bit with some rubbing alcohol and a toothbrush, but you could get this bark almost white by just cleaning it off. The green color that I'm seeing anyway is an algae on it, and so that can come right off, gets really white, and what that does is really just the contrast between the foliage and the trunk and even the container just jumps. It makes all this movement that you're seeing just really stand out, and that's the whole thing that I love about these microphyllas, is the fact of how this undulation is all about. And you see some, looking through it, you see just branches crossing each other. It's fantastic because it's doing things that we've been taught not to do, but you see a live oak in nature and a Kingsville in a pot, and they do that. It's a natural way. It makes them look a little bit more natural. When you're looking at it from this side, you can look through and see that this side's been raised a little bit. That was done in the field. I cut very little off that was going down. But you see these pieces back here that are hanging down. If this was the back of the tree, I could leave some of that to really stop the eye, give you depth and everything. But I'm not so sure. I want to work it where both sides, both ends could be the front if we choose to. This is going to be a work in progress, so sooner or later the decision needs to be made, but it doesn't have to be tonight. We can look at it, vote. We're going to have a difference of opinion. Maybe I'll vote. Maybe I'll keep count. But my vote's the one that counts.
I think you should be a dictator tonight.
Yeah, I will.
I think you should be an absolute dictator.
So I'm going to just show you a little bit of how it's approached from my side. And that's these low branches. I'm going to just go ahead and take them off. And so I'll just get them started. Already looks better to me. You can see up under it. And I see another one that I'm going to kind of work on too. But I'll do that later. So I've got them. They look like this. And I'm going to see if they'll go ahead and break for me. Yeah. First program I did for my mom's garden club, I went to break a branch and the whole trunk broke, and I have one branch to work with. It's a tough way to start a tree.
Yeah, that was an accident for you. That's intentional for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And a quick interruption. Gary was wondering, can we zoom in on the point of the break?
Oh yeah,
Sure.
Get the detail.
Yeah.
Once you've broken a few, take
Yeah,
us,
let me pick
take
the
us back
best
to that.
one.
You do what you got to do and create the space, and we'll kind of watch you handle this. Take us back and show us that
This
detail.
one's not breaking, so I'm going to help it. They call these nippers for a reason. I see why it's not breaking. Weird angle.
You generally consider Kingsville to be pretty brittle, or you feel like they're relatively flexible compared to?
They are flexible, you know, when you're wiring them and everything. They're generally not brittle except in the crotch. So your wiring has to be done correctly so it doesn't break in the crotch. The thing is, you got to push them to get them to set their wood, because they're thin-skinned. So it takes a while for the wire to really set. If you get damage on the tree from, usually it's the way you wire it, but that'll show for a long, long time. With the whiter the bark is, I've had trouble with copper wire, for instance, because as it's oxidizing, it leaves a stain on the white that takes a while to come off. If they get moss up the trunk and everything, that also takes a while to get back to being white once you clean it off. I usually use rubbing alcohol, but that little spray gun for dry cleaning really works nicely also. But you see, so far, that raised it up quite nicely where it looks a lot more equal around. You can kind of see it. Here's a good example of how this tree continues to mutate. This is a mutation from the mutation. And so I'm looking for one that's really tiny. You know, it's got to go that way also.
So you see them get smaller, actually? You see the mutations? So these are sports? Would you call that a sport?
Well, it's a mutation from a mutation. You can call it a sport, you know, witch's brooms. You know, so the original one could have been called a witch's broom. I have not seen one that goes smaller than a Kingsville witch. But theory-wise, it's got to be there.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. Now, Rodney, you're from Atlanta, Georgia. You have historically, or at least you are known for focusing on boxwoods and inside of boxwoods compacta. But when did boxwoods come about in your bonsai career, and how did you develop the knowledge or refine your knowledge of them over the course of time? What's the name of your garden too?
The name of the garden is All Good Bonsai, and so we enjoy the Kingsville. Obviously, we've got a lot of them, so we really do enjoy them. It was the tree that taught me bonsai, taught me how to see the line in a tree, because the best teacher of bonsai is Mother Nature and looking at the trees. And the live oak was the first tree I climbed, first tree I fell out of. So I looked at it, I knew it quite well. I was having trouble, I was struggling with finding the tree within the tree. And so when I saw the first boxwood, it was like instant love, because this looked like a tree to me, and following that line and everything that it presented was fantastic. So Atlanta's a lucky spot as far as the history of Kingsvilles go, because there was a father, a monk in a monastery in Atlanta, and Henry Holman actually gifted him one of the first boxwoods and said, "You should try this. I think it would make a good bonsai." And so Father Paul did. That tree is probably the most well-known of all the boxwoods, of the Kingsvilles, I mean. And it's one that I've had the pleasure for the last 15 years of curating and keeping going. So it's a great tree, looks really old, super white bark, very, very tiny leaves. So, I've broken off some, that's the fun part. It goes quick that way. Now I'm going to start pruning. So I'm looking at it, I'm bringing things up, I want to get the eye into it, and I'm going to open this up again. If I was doing this at home and I was taking my time, just this amount of foliage, this amount of mass, I would spend several days doing it, because your eyes go crossed at a while. The other side I went a lot faster. I was trying to get it to where we could see some of it. So, I'm going to start. I usually start at the base. The one thing I'll tell you about any of this is really a broadleaf evergreen. It's a shrub. And so the side parts, they're the most dominant. They're going to be the stronger. The apex is not quite as strong, a lot like an azalea. So you got to be careful with the apex. If you lose the apex for any reason, damage from tree limbs, poor pruning, frost, whatever, that's going to be the end of the tree as far as being able to work it for a long time. They're slow growing. The apex, you lose it. It takes a while to do the comb over and get it back to looking right. Sometimes you have to cut them way back. It's a tree that you can cut back pretty far. So you have, one thing I've done cleaning it up is you've got this foliage mass here, all up underneath all this foliage you're seeing are little buds. The buds pop out all the way down into the crotches, even down here. You could probably show that, Jose, if you wanted to. I didn't get them all, but it comes all the way down here. That allows you to cut this tree back almost as far as you want to if you do it equally. So it's got to be an equal prune job. So
now, what is the scope of work that you're doing right now, and is now the best time to do it?
Well, it's a very forgiving tree, and so there are many times to do it, and there's a reason you're doing it through the year. This is a good time to really work the Kingsville and or the microphyllus. And the reason is, when you open it up right now, it's really too late in the year for it to start growing again. And so it sits there. And so the sunlight's getting to it, the breezes go through it, the buds activate. And so when spring comes, rather than doing a hot flush where you get the large leaves and they're hot growth wherever the strong spot is, you get a consistent growth. They're usually smaller leaves, and they come out all over. So it's a good time to prune. If I'm going to edit one of the older boxwoods, then I'm going to do it this time of year.
So this is almost like a time of year where you get a refinement, and I think you're going to show us how to handle those branching clumps, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, but this is to get a finer response. Are there other times of year that you would prune a boxwood to get different responses?
Absolutely. So this time of year, when you're pruning it, again, you've got from now until the 1st of April in Atlanta, to where you're going to sit and enjoy the tree. It's putting buds out. You're going to see all those, but the tree stays looking refined for a long period of time. If you prune right before, and there's reasons to do it right before the flush of spring happens, then the tree kicks in. It's going to try to replace those leaves really fast, and the way it does that was a big leaf. Now, there are reasons to use that, because the tree's really trying to grow. So you could put on a lot of hot growth if you wanted to. If you wanted to make a branch grow more than the others, you could do it then. But I generally will repot at that point because it's the easiest, but you can repot these almost all year long with that right aftercare. Very, very strong root system. Tops genetically dwarf the root system, didn't know that. They're very strong root-wise. So you can do a lot with it. And so if you make the mistake of really trying to refine an old tree in the spring, the tree's going to kick into growth. And so right after spring, it's going to have another flush. You're not going to like that either. Then you're going to prune it again. It's going to have another flush. It will keep doing that all year long. If you wait too long and do it at the end of, say, summer, first of fall, then what takes place is that new growth that comes out at that point doesn't have time to harden off and will winter burn. And so that's what you don't want to do. But
Quick clarification. Is this for Boxwoods in general or specifically Kingsville?
well, where I'm in my wheelhouse is with Kingsville's. But yes, it's generally it's for all the Boxwoods. I kind of have focused on Kingsville's because they give a far, you see the tree far away because of the size of the leaf and everything. So that's why I do it. Some of my favorite Boxwoods are some of the japonicas that have a much larger leaf. They're stronger, so it really almost needs to be a larger tree for it to work in my mind the same as this does. So the leaf really matters, the leaf size with that. But you can use the same practices, yes. And,
We've got 1,000,000,001 questions, but I don't want to keep you from rocking out. So as you work, I'm just going to talk to you.
All right.
But show us what you're going to do there, because I'm really curious to see this. I watched you work a little bit today, but I'm learning as is everybody else.
Okay, usually I start at the base, but the hard part is I've grown today, so I'm a little taller than I needed to be. So I'm going to kind of start in an area that's just really comfortable. And I go in, I kind of look at it. What I've done mostly is clean it up today, and I've got it where most of the dead stuff is taken away. I'm taking off the danglies like we normally do. Then I'm taking the branch, separating a little bit, and I'm going in and opening it up and cutting it back. So I'm going into the foliage. I like using my scissor at an angle so I can go in and not cut leaves. So if I can get away with not cutting leaves, they brown. They're there for a long time like that. You end up having to go back in and pick the brown leaves off. Now this tree, even though we're doing a lot of work today, I plan on, if I have time tomorrow, just really sitting down with it and nicely adding what I'm doing today. So kind of cleans it up.
So are you taking it back to 2 or 3 shoots? Or are you taking it back to, how are you handling those clumps?
Well, some of them, because this is normally, if I were working a tree that's already been worked before as bonsai, then I'm doing it consistently even. I'm not counting the leaves, but I'm pretty much doing it anywhere from 2 to 7 to something like that. And you pick a weak spot and kind of prune it up a little bit, then you go to the rest of the tree.
So you're pruning the elongated shoots back to that leaf count of the weakest shoots, but are you taking the number of shoots at any junction down to 2 or 3?
If today I will not, but yes, I'm going to go in there, and it's always 2, 2, 2s if you can do it.
Okay.
If I'm going to use 3, it's 2 up at the top, and I might do a low sweeping branch or something like that. But it's a matter of just really coming in and getting the tree looking consistent. And you're making it look good, making it look consistent, but at the same time, what takes place is even growth. That's always what you're trying to look for.
An even growth, you're accomplishing even growth by pruning at this time, which is going to give you a more even push out next season of really small leaves, and you're getting that even growth by pruning the stronger areas down to the weaker areas in terms of leaves, so that you have, wherever you have leaf mass, the leaves in that positive space, the branching density and leaf density is the same, equivalent.
Yes.
Yeah. This is really interesting. It's really enlightening to hear your discussion about pruning in the fall at this point in time gives you a nice evenly distributed small leaf push next spring, as opposed to if you prune next spring prior to the push of growth, you're going to get a big rampant flush.
You're going to get a jump.
Which would give you strong branching if you wanted to build branches with.
Right.
You could build secondary branching with. You could build maybe transition taper with that stronger flush of growth to cut back or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, one way to look at it would be if you were had a young tree and you're wanting it to get larger quicker, you're pushing the growth, you're making it kick into its strong suit. So yeah, there are reasons to do it, and but when you're working on a refined tree that's old, then you're wanting to have that slow growth. The one thing about the fast growth, the hot growth as I call it, what takes place is when it grows that strong, that fast, like with anything, it grows a very straight, non-tapered branch. And so when you do it this way and it grows slowly, the branches undulate. You get a lot more of the movement that you're seeing that this one grew as, just in the ground.
Now let me ask you, what do you desire in terms of soil composition for a Kingsville that's in a bonsai container? Currently, this is the native field soil that it's grown in for the past 80 years, and then we built this cedar box because it was balled and burlapped, and we put it into pumice. We sifted out the 16, so it's basically 1/8 to 1/4 pumice, and we'd only plan on it being in here for the next year in this. But what would you plant boxwood in? And would you plant Kingsville in something different than a standard boxwood?
No. Again, their root system is so strong, they will grow in a lot of different mixes. But, basically the mix that we're getting great results with is just basically a bonsai mix, a normal mix. I'm starting to add a lot more akadama to it than normal, than I used to. But it was a 3-part mix, and we get it to where maybe less lava because we need the moisture. I call them really a duff plant. They grow in their own litter. They're like an azalea, so they grow in an area where their leaves are coming down. The root mass, the soil level, is usually rising on the tree, so that root level will continue to go up, and it grows a fantastic root system. An azalea is another good example of that. But the consistency of the soil, what you've got to have is the fact that it needs to stay an evenly moist soil, but gets a lot of air through it. So, it's not wet soil, it's evenly moist.
Yeah.
And so, that's why you don't want to compact the soil around them in the ground, but in a bonsai pot, it's perfect for them. They love pot culture because of that.
So you're going basically standard mix, akadama, pumice, lava, for lack of a better term. But you're saying as you've progressed, you're going with more akadama in that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's been a transition for me because, I feel like I grew up in bonsai before akadama was used like it is today. I mean, I love it. And so the first soil that I used that just really kicked it was some decomposed granite we live in an area with a lot of granite, Stone Mountain's right around the corner. And so some of the decomposed granite is a lot like the pumice in a sense. So you can sit there and squish it and it breaks apart. It's really, really nice. And so we used to use that. I used to use decomposed pine bark. A lot of people still do, but when it's decomposing, it's also rotting. And part of it I like to go as long as I can without repotting if the tree's really healthy. So
How long on a refined tree specifically would you try to push a boxwood?
Well, it's a great question. It depends on how. If I'm going to change a pot, and that happens a lot, I just see a better pot for a certain tree, then I'm going to do it at any time. I don't care if it was a year later.
Yeah.
But my teacher said that basically most people repot their trees too often. And so his thing was once you start seeing the tree stress a little bit, slow down a little bit, that's when you want to come in and repot. And so we're looking for that. I worked on a customer's boxwood that was in fantastic condition. And so I took it out of the container. Great root system. They weren't too compacted around the side. It was a matrix of roots all through the soil and everything. And I looked at the soil and it was like a soil I hadn't seen in years. And I said, how long's this thing been potted? He goes, I don't know, probably about 35 years ago.
Wow.
And it was fantastic.
Wow.
So, I've not seen another one quite that extreme, but.
Yeah, interesting. And would you ever gravitate towards 100% akadama?
I listened to your live stream about Boxwoods not too long ago, and it was like, why not?
Yeah.
I'll try that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've already done it. So,
Oh,
yeah.
good. It'd be interesting to see
The
how that
answer is
goes.
yes.
Yeah, cool. And then, because I'm just like fielding questions the chat is going, and I know you're getting to a lot of this, but when you see boxwood, and I've had this experience as well, Southern California stands out as having a high water pH and a high mineral content in their water. And boxwoods in Southern California do tend to be more yellow and look a little more stressed. This tree, super deep dark green, coming out of the northeastern United States. What do boxwood like for water quality, pH, or fertilizer, and how would you rectify a boxwood? I know it's obviously challenging to say a yellowing boxwood, this is how you fix it, but what do they like, and how do you fix some of the common issues with boxwood?
Well, usually when I see a yellowing in boxwoods, I'm looking at one thing. It's always kind of from the roots up. I'm looking at the roots, what caused that. And a lot of times it is the water quality. And, when these trees, plants like to be in the ground and they're growing nicely, they're in pretty much an acid soil. And so, it's 6.5 to 6.8 is their perfect zone. In Atlanta, just our city water can be 8 to 11 to 12, depends on the day.
Oh, wow.
And so it's very alkaline. And so that's what a lot of people are dealing with. So when you're dealing with that, then you need to adjust. And there are ways to do it. But one of the things that boxwood get is a mineral deficiency and need a little bit more magnesium. And you start seeing little yellow raised area around the outside of the leaf. I don't really see any on this one, but it's very common. And so one of the things is magnesium sulfate, Epsom salts. So we pretty much, that's something we just go ahead and prophylactically do. Every month or so, we sprinkle some on.
And that's with your very basic water that you have. So do you think the alkalinity is causing the magnesium deficiency?
I'm not really sure, but all I know is if you overdo the magnesium, it doesn't burn. It's not a salt. It actually just turns your soil more acid. So the benefits are there. But that's the only thing I've been able to really discern about it, is it does work. Now, as far as these guys love organic fertilizer. I mean, they're the poster child for using organic fertilizers. Their leaves don't blow up as much. And so the old nursery fertilizer of choice was cottonseed meal. And they love that. And I think probably the acid content of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about the Epsom salt, because you're talking about magnesium sulfate, and sulfur is also an element that will drop the pH. So if you're dealing with very alkaline or poor water quality, that little treatment of Epsom salts that gives it the magnesium, which it sounds like boxwood has a predilection to be deficient in alkaline soils, as well as the addition of the sulfur, which would drop the acidity or would reduce the alkalinity, making the magnesium, nitrogen, and iron more available. That all makes a lot of sense to me. That makes a lot of sense to me.
The other thing with fertilizer that I see a lot of people making the mistake on is really over-fertilizing with boxwood. They just don't need a lot to eat. And so we fertilize. We try to fertilize twice a year, and we're doing it with a very mild dose. We're not doing weak fertilizer, but we're doing with a mild dose. And so, something with not a lot of nitrogen.
Mm-hmm. And so it's just slow and steady for you.
Yeah.
And what about winter tolerance? Boxwood, are they tolerant to significantly cold conditions? When you put them in a container, does that change?
It changes a little bit. You put them in the ground, it's always, because of the root temperature, it's always better. The coldest in Atlanta that I've had boxwoods, and they were, the old one that I have was sitting on the ground, had sawdust up to about right in here, and maybe a little bit higher if this was it. And everything below was fine, everything above it cracked and blew up. Now, it was 75 degrees was the coldest, all the way up until Christmas Eve, and it went down to 12 below zero overnight.
Oh,
and
wow.
it just blew up a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So, I see them all over. I know that some of the people I've talked to, like up in upstate New York and everything, they can't grow boxwoods even in the ground. But I mean, obviously in Maryland, there's a big group of these around the White House. Washington, D.C., they're in the ground without any trouble at all. I've seen them up in Cincinnati and graveyards and rose gardens and stuff. So they make a great border. Henry Holman grew them for sort of the English knot garden, which was very popular in his day. He was kind of known for boxwoods, so he bought a lot of them in. Boxwoods and Japanese maples. So you can see I'm kind of working around this very slowly. I'll come back in and edit. What generally I do is bring the tree back into a certain zone where I've got it as far back as I want. Then I'm going to edit and create, rather than pads, I'm creating areas like this to where the negative space becomes really important. When it fills back in, then I'm going to go in and keep those little negative areas focused so you can see through it, the air can go through, and the light can get through.
Rodney, will you do me a favor? Will you spin it to the untouched back corner there so that back corner, yes, and keep going, and just face that to you, the unworked corner here, because there's a lot of there's a lot of questions about, hey, approaching a tree like this with this kind of like lack of definition, where does Rodney begin? How do you even crack into this tree? What's a basic way that we can access design when we're faced with a giant mound like this?
Yeah, it's a good point. Good question. So generally what I'm going to do is I just kind of crack it open and start looking at the inside. And so I'm looking at it, I'm seeing how the branches are growing, and I start editing ones out that are weak or going out of where I want to see. The zone is not where I want to see. So an example is this, I'm going to say right here, this branch in here. It's a weak branch. It's not taking up a lot of space. I will say this, there might be a small branch that's weak in the center of the tree. I'm always going to follow it up to the top and see what happens at the top. Because it might be small, might be thin, but it could be a very large section of the top of this tree. So check it out first, check it out, then cut. So I'm going in, I'm cutting this branch right there. You can see that started opening it up, just that one cut. Then I'm starting to see the negative area. So I've worked this one spot. Now I'm going to come in and start just opening it up and cutting it back. I'm going to take it back as far as I can within the silhouette that I think I'm going to go. I can always go back in there. It's hard to adjust and come back out, of course, but I'm going to kind of get it to where you can see it.
You ever, so you're talking about just a general, you're talking about just a general sort of slow application, organic fertilizer, periodically over the course of the growing season. You ever foliar feed, you add a little bit of Epsom salt, which is magnesium sulfate, periodically, because you're dealing with very alkaline, high pH, high mineral content, hard water, to compensate for boxwoods' predisposition to be magnesium deficient. But if you were dealing with neutral water and you were just feeding with organic fertilizer, you feel like that would be enough, or would you still think boxwood would be magnesium deficient?
I don't know, but I'm going to say that the magnesium, being that it's not a salt, that it's just a supplement, it's not going to do any harm. The plant's going to take in what it really needs. If it doesn't need it, it's going to slough it off. It's going to turn the soil acid, which I don't think it'll turn it too acid. We've got 3 water sources for our bonsai. We've got the county city water, we have our well, and we also have a lake. The lake is perfect. It's nicely acid. The well water is pretty close, but basically the city water is just off the charts, not helpful. But the Masakuni nozzles don't get clogged up with all the debris.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that makes sense. So coming back to the kelp or anything like that, in addition to just a basic balance, then honestly, cottonseed meal is high nitrogen, low phosphorus, low potassium.
Yeah.
So you're basically just saying for Kingsville's, with the foliar production that they pursue, the biggest setback is over-fertilization and people over-fertilizing them, but just a sort of moderate application of a higher nitrogen, lower phosphorus, lower potassium, you find that to be what they prefer the most?
Well, I don't know if they prefer it the most. We're adding things to it, but we're just not over-fertilizing with a lot of fertilizer every month and stuff like that. We're going to fertilize. Generally, I let them have the first flush in the spring, then I'll fertilize. So in Atlanta, it's going to be May, and then that kicks in, gives them the summer growing period, and then they slow down for the summer dormancy. And at that period, we wait, but the fall's my favorite time to fertilize them because that gives them really nice, a lot of energy to go through the winter, then put all those buds I'm talking about.
So would you be fertilizing in the fall and then following up in the late fall with a pruning like this as a refinement pruning, and that you have the energy in the tree, but then you distribute it in the fall and you get a much more even push out next spring, and that is kind of your major strategy?
Yeah.
That's beautiful. For refinement specifically, that's a really beautiful piece of knowledge that you're dropping on us. Are they, so I just checked it out, boxwood in general, just as a broad generalization of Buxus, USDA zones 5 to 8. Obviously in a containerized environment, there's going to be more sensitivities depending on the soil mass. Also, you talked about the rapid temperature change that caused your boxwood to fail from 75 to -12. No secret there, that would be stressful. But
yeah, it was for me too.
Yeah, oh, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
But winter bronzing and whatnot, anything to be concerned about if boxwoods, I've seen them turn yellow, I've seen them turn orange, brown, etc., and they come right back out of it in the spring. Is that just standard course?
Yeah, everyone doesn't do it, and they don't do it every year. I'm not really sure. It's scary the first time it happens to your trees, but it does come out. The leaves that are orange don't fall off. We see mostly orange ones. They don't fall off. It's amazing. And it's early in the spring or late winter that they all of a sudden they start greening back up. I don't have an explanation for it, but it's like one of those miracles that's kind of you get comfortable with in the end. But the first time, it's pretty scary.
Yeah, interesting.
I don't know of another tree that does it quite so radically as the boxwood. And there for a while, we're taking sports from sports a lot of times with these cuttings. And the ones that have the larger leaves and are a little bit further away from the original look of the Kingsville they turn the orangest of any of them.
Which ones do?
The ones with the larger leaves like this.
Gotcha.
And they show that winter bronzing more. The little tiny leaf one stays dark green most of the year.
Yeah.
And so we'll get sometimes if they get a hard freeze on them before, they really calm down and get into winter hibernation, they'll bronze then, but not much.
And do you think, let me just ask, how do you think the humidity of Atlanta might change the way that you handle boxwood compared to, and you work all over the country on boxwood and client trees all over the country, students all over the country. Does the timing techniques and considerations change in drier regions versus more humid regions?
I'm sure they do. I mean, I generally work in more humid areas than out in the desert and everything like that. And I've seen a lot of people with, you go, Kingsvilles and Boxwoods are good deep into Florida, but not all the way past them. Florida's got a lot of zones, but you can get out of their comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And so they're one of the plants, just changing the subject slightly, that my mom lives on the water in Florida, so she gets a lot of salt to the breeze, and even the hurricanes and stuff. Of course, they're pushing salt up into the soil. It doesn't seem to bother the Kingsvilles. They might burn a little bit, but they don't get bothered by that too much.
So they can tolerate it.
Yeah, yeah.
And do they tolerate it better than other boxwood species?
I think the Kingsville, the microphyllus are from Japonica, and so those all seem to handle the salt very nicely.
Japonica in general.
Yeah. But I think, your low humidity, no humidity would be a tough one to get around.
Now, it's interesting because I know in the Mediterranean regions of southern France, the boxwood, that there's a native variety of boxwood, and you see those like Francois Gao or John Paul Pullman's has a really notable, or Francois Jacquer has some really notable collected French boxwood. Mm-hmm. And those are growing very, very close to the coast. They're growing in a little bit of a Mediterranean region. Humidity would be higher, but they have pretty dry, arid summers in that region as well. But of course, that's not the Japonica. That's not coming from the Japonica. The Japonica comes from high humidity and some of the sort of central southern regions of Japan, and so it makes sense. There's like you have some durability to heat, you have some durability to cold. Extremes in either way probably compromise boxwood and that become more sensitive in a containerized environment. But that salt tolerance is an interesting one. Humidity tolerance is an interesting one. But there probably is a threshold. There's somebody on the chat who's cultivated boxwood, and there's a lot of boxwood grown in landscapes on the Front Range in Colorado. And you have a pretty low relative humidity, but they're being grown in landscapes where I'm assuming they're having to be irrigated and hydrated and having that relative humidity from sprinkler systems as well. So there's, I think for everybody that's trying to grab onto what are the constraints of boxwood, et cetera, it's a loose constraint in a containerized environment where we have the ability to manipulate the microclimate. But they are a moderate tree in terms of their behavior, it sounds like.
Right. And again, where they're growing is in a duff layer, so it's moist. It's cool and moist generally because their foliage is shading it, and a lot of air, but it's moist.
Interesting. I wonder if you could get away in more arid conditions or in warmer conditions with a boxwood by providing shade to the container. You're making a very strong point there. It's almost like larch in a bonsai container. If you keep the container shaded, they're very tolerant of warmer conditions.
And maybe color of the container might be in the Atlanta area, one of my favorite colors is almost a dark black green, because the combination of the foliage and the pot makes the trunk even jump more. But it still heats up a good bit, that color. So
Yeah, and would you ever consider boxwood to be so strong that you could dig a tree out of the ground and do this kind of work, or is that assuming too much of the boxwood in terms of being too aggressive?
It's a plant you can be very aggressive with. I think just like with anything, if you take a boxwood out of the ground that's really healthy, you can do a lot to it. And so when you're taking them out of the ground, they're very healthy. The stored energy is out the wazoo. So you can do a lot with it. We'll go ahead and with the boxwoods, of course they grow in that duff layer. So the whole bottom part of the tree is generally a 6-inch deep band of just the fibrous roots. You can pretty much take a shovel, go around the outside, and use the tree itself and push it over, and just maybe a few roots that go past out of that zone. So it makes a very, very easy tree to go ahead and put into a bonsai application. We generally go into a box or a deeper container. We bought a lot of mica, so we use mica for that. And so it works fantastic. But we go ahead that first time that we're pulling it out of the ground, we're going to go ahead and clean all the way up to the bottom of the trunk on the inside. So we've got it to where we never have to go back in and then investigate the root system where you're cutting big roots, cutting them further back, cutting them further back. They're full of energy. We go ahead and really cut them all the way back to where we've got them, to where we can put them in a bonsai pot that's shallow, makes the trunk look larger and everything.
In terms of the depth, now would you wash the roots? Would you actually wash all the native soil off, or do you try to not bear root?
We try not to bear root, and generally with the boxwoods, I call it a plate. They get a hard surface. You've got the bottom worked. The biggest deal with finding the roots is really combing it out, being very careful. They scratch easy, so you don't want to use a root hook or anything. But you can wash that part off, get it down. We'll spend as much time cleaning the surface as anything, because that's where the tree is. That's going to tell you everything art-wise. So we'll clean that up very nicely, but we'll get that root system really shallow, find the top and work that, and then the sides we're going to bring in. And generally after that, if the tree stays healthy, we do not have to go back into that plate area. And so it's something we never really wash. We generally are bare root, because the root mass is so thick at that point, it's just a fibrous mass. And when you put it into good soil, it jumps. So, I don't know if I'd answer your question totally, but when we pull these out of the ground, you can easily do the whole thing and get them into a bonsai pot, but it generally should be a deeper pot, so you catch it back up. Mm-hmm. But you could do get it into pot culture the first year, after the first time you've done it, and you could prune it back, and the balance would be there if it's healthy.
Because it's got so much strength coming out of the ground. Yeah, this makes sense. It makes a lot of sense.
But if it's weak, no.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's almost like treating them, when you do a broadleaf deciduous and you pull those out of the ground in the spring, and you cut the heavy roots back, and you do all the root work, and you can cut the branching back at the same time.
Right.
That stored energy, that moment coming out of that situation, is kind of where you have maximum access. What will you do with the aerial root, the big aerial root on this tree? This has been a big question in the chat over the course of the stream. What's going to happen with that? How do you handle that? If you're going to remove it, how would you remove it? What's the skinny?
Okay. You want to go ahead and remove it?
No, I just want you to. I'm not saying to do it. I'm saying this is what people are asking about.
I'm jumping all over doing it. It was hard for me not to do it when I was cleaning the tree up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because you look at this. Say, I've been kind of. I'll go ahead and get right to the chase, because that will help with what I'm about to say. Is so far spinning the tree around and looking at it today, where this rock is. This area would be my go-to spot right now for a front of the tree. And I'm not saying that that's where I'm going to go in the end, but that's the part that I like the branch structure, and more importantly, I like the way the roots work together, giving you that spread. You see the sort of the live tissue coming up. You got swelling, different ones, so it gives you, it's not a trunk coming up. There's actually just different grades, and each branch you can see where it's going down, but there's movement there, even in the trunk, little twist and everything. This kind of breaks that up, and so it hides what's behind it. So, I was dying to take it off. I'm glad everybody wants to see it done, but first thing I'm going to do is come in here, probably not. It's pretty hard wood, and once boxwood lignifies, it's very hard. And so in Germany and places like that, they use the wood itself for carving. So it's very strong wood. I've experimented, because the live oaks have the propensity to have some dead wood on them that lasts for a long time for a broadleaf tree. And so I'm always experimenting. And this was one that you could also decide if you're going to cut the system off and maybe show a little spur of a dead root. That's one approach to this.
And boxwood wood would last for a fairly significant period of time?
Yeah, long enough that, it's not going to be like deciduous. It is going to rot, and so the deal is I'm not going to lime sulfur it, so I'm not getting that just a fungicide, and I don't want the wood to get light like the trunk. And so to stand out, I'm going to let it age naturally. But if I was going to seal it quickly and make it look better, I'm going to use a good bit of India ink into the lime sulfur so it darkens the wood, makes it so you get the contrast.
Yep. And so removing a root like this, if you had a bunch of them, would you remove them at this time of year, or is this because you're doing one, it's safe to do? Like, how do you?
Well, another good question. It's very safe because this root's up high and it's got the root below it that's really doing the work also. So it's a high root. You get around to some of these other ones, like for instance, this one. Yeah, I would love not to have that space in there. There are ways to let the tree fill that in. And one is raising the soil. The other one, if you want it high like this, is where this is the grade of it, then we'll fill that up with some kind of muck and moss that so it looks good. You don't see your eye doesn't go through it, but the tree itself will throw roots up into that and actually fill it up, and that will form what looks like wood. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't take that long. I'm just now seeing this is going to be the one to get a close up on if I do my job.
You
right.
in there, Jesus? He's going to break. He's going to break the living daylights out of this.
So it's not breaking too easily. So I'm going to come in and cut the odds down. So I'm shortening this so I can get my hands in there. I'm going to rip up. I think that's going to be the better look than going down and messing with the root system. So I'm going to come in here, snip a little bit at the bottom.
Nice, I see what you're doing. Just kind of weakening that bottom point of attachment to give yourself an entry point.
Right, and I'm hoping.
Oh, it wants to go.
It does. It's
yeah,
right
it wants
at
to
it.
go. It's close.
Can I use these?
Yeah, you're free to crank on it. I do it all the time.
Didn't really do what I wanted. So what I would do at home right now is go ahead and cut it off and then carve it and go up a little bit. I'm still going to try to do it.
There you go. Nice.
So after it dries a little bit, I'll enlarge it just a bit. It's easier if I do it now. It seems like I don't get as much of a tear.
Because it's so wet.
Yeah.
These also have been sitting outside in the rain for 3 weeks, so pretty hydrated.
Trying to take this little protrusion off. So that's sort of the way it looks now without the root being there. And you can kind of see now.
Monumental difference.
Huge in there, this movement that comes up. And again, this guy here is a problem that I would deal with. And there's another bit of perch here where the water or air, light can go through, and I'd like to seal that up. Just pushing a little muck in there, even some fines of the akadama would do it. And so this area here, if you're looking at the front, you get this little bit of a 90, a little bit of an elbow there. And so I'm gonna work on that too. And the way I would do it is basically take a grafting knife and just slightly cut this outside bit down. And then I would go on the inside and scar that a little bit. That scar tissue will bring that out, and this will go, and that makes that flow just a little bit better. Then again, filling it up. I just trying to get rid of that 90.
Interesting. Sculpting the roots.
Well, yeah. I mean, the other way to do it is raise the root level, and these roots so easy. You could do little scars, little just indentations in it, and you'll get roots at that spot. So we'll take a chisel and kind of, I call it lips, but we go from the side so it interrupts a lot more. Just a little, almost like a rice-shaped piece, and so it, you've got water going up, starches and sugars coming down, and it hits that spot, and you get more roots in that one spot, like an air layer or something. These root so easily, air layer so easily. Even a piece like this in here will root. In fact, I've rooted a piece this size. Actually, Charlie, my wife, rooted a piece this size.
Really?
Yeah, and so she did a lot with some of the cuttings. I had to stop her because we started getting too many. But a piece like this, if I was going to take this, we could cut it almost like a long piece of firewood, lay it over into a pot, and it will actually root, and then you'll have tons and tons of little trees sprouting out of it. So you get like a little forest. That one would not be a good one because it doesn't have good movement, but you get a branch that's got a little bit of undulation in it, and it makes a great sort of a raft style with a little movement on the top. I don't like ones that are just flat and straight. The other thing I would like to see done, this branch bothers me right here, and it stops your eye from going up and seeing all this. So it's a softer tree with this, but I would personally take that off, and this obviously is going to be harder to rip. So, but I don't want to really see how well it's going to do.
And you feel like you've got the front dialed in to where you're pretty settled on that.
Well, I've looked at it all day long.
Yeah, you're based, no doubt about it.
So, it's the tree's got good movement. You've got this root system. It's a combination with boxwoods. You're not going to change a lot very quickly, but I'm looking at, first off, I want to see what the best possible spread of the roots are. I want to see how the trunk works for those. So this one's got that little bit of a love twist in trunks. So it's got that very nicely, works with the roots. And then you get up, you've climbed the tree, you get up into where the branches are, and they've got to work. And so that's sort of the progression that I go to. It might be, that the branches really don't work at all from that, and you have to go to another one that maybe the trunk is not, maybe the roots are not as good, but the branches and all work. You're not going to cut big ones. If I cut, for instance, if I don't like a branch like this size, for instance, and I make this cut, that scar is going to come down, probably kill this root, and so you would have you're going to not be able to control the depth of that side.
Right. You rock out, man. Don't let me. I haven't been looking at this tree all day, and in fact, I don't even know what you're proposing. But you do what you need to do on this tree.
I will.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
You told me I could. And
I told you
10 feet between us right
I
now.
told you you could. Wow.
You need a bigger one of these.
I felt like those were pretty big,
Yeah. Trying to just get it started. not really working for me today. But there was a big old one that was in front of the old family house. And the house burned. It was heart of pine in Florida. And it burned and really scorched everything around it. And that tree got burned on half the side. And that was in 1945. And the gins and charis that are on it are phenomenal. And they're still there from that fire. So I always try to kind of show those kind of looks. So I'm going to work on that for a little bit longer, but I mainly wanted to go ahead and show what took place by opening that up. See, it maybe has worked my front a little different, where that front is now. Did it change it?
I don't know. I see where you're trying to create a visible spot that you're guiding people to, right?
Yeah. So it could be over here now. But I still like it from the initial spot, which is good. But I did not like that branch, which came out. It was a little bit straighter, stronger. And now you see, because it's not there, we'll probably reduce that a good bit. I took one back earlier and kind of left it. Got to get one to crack right. Oh, yeah. Come to mama. That's more what I'm talking about there, where that branch that was there, you can see how it got torn off without looking at me do it. And it looks just like that came off. And when that heals, and it will heal, it's still going to be around this outside edge. That center part with all that breaking will be there for years and years and years. Mm-hmm. See that, again, what I'm wanting to see is all this undulation through there. And so when I get it to this stage, this part is just opened up. I'm still going to go back in and leaf prune this to the point where I'm probably going to be taking off a fourth to a third of the leaves that are left on this.
And when you say leaf proof, cutting back to the same density, quantity of leaves as the weak, essentially.
Yeah, and I might even get into an area like this and just start, this one that needs to come off, but I might get into an area and just start coming in and picking leaves off, So you can really adjust a lot of the look just by taking leaves off, taking the big leaves off, taking the underside off. But, I'll pick. To show one of these guys, there's days of picking leaves and stuff. Mm-hmm. And so good pair of scissors, you can go in and cut one leaf at a time. But I'm going to open it up, each little space going through. I don't like creating clouds or pads in these. I want to kind of keep it really open. Also, I don't know if you can show this or not, looking up when there's sun on the top and you've got it pruned nicely on the top, then you should be able to see the dappled light going up through the tree. That's a beautiful look. Insects. Nobody's asking about insects.
There's been a lot of questions about insects, and we've kind of been waiting for that. Leaf miners, other things. How do you manage and control insects on boxwood? What do you commonly deal with? Give me the skinny.
Okay, the skinny is really, it's one of the best things. I don't know if you think like a bug and you try to chew on one of these leaves, they taste like crap. So, you know, it's not something that really a lot of bugs like. We are looking for different types of mites. We're looking for some leaf miner, thrips, and even scale. But I don't see if the tree's healthy, we don't see any of it. And so the main thing is to keep your tree healthy, and I don't think you'll have to worry about that. They usually come to plants that are stressed, and with boxwoods, they're generally not stressed too much, and they do. There's a taste to them. Deer will only eat them when they are really hungry.
Are starving to death.
Yeah, they will eat them.
If your boxwood does have leaf miners, how would you go about resolving that issue?
Well, that's a tough one. They're hard to catch with tweezers, by the way. You know, we'll try different ways. You know, we're in a nursery situation where we are. And so we can't treat the same way a lot of people could go about it. But I'm going to wholesale spray. The first thing that I'm going to use probably is Towel Star to do it. But there are many other contact sprays to get it. The issue really is how good you are at spraying, because it's a very hard plant to really spray. And so are you going to spray or are you going to mist? Well, when you mist, you're getting a lot better coverage. It throws it in there. It goes all through the plant. But it also gets all over you when you mist. And so you got to wear a hazmat suit just about. So it's a lot easier to really do it from the inside out. So systemics are the easier way to do it. And that's what we're kind of been going to. And, you know, there are good ones and there's not so good ones, and most of them are not so good. But
essentially, you can knock down leaf miners or anything in the plant dealing with systemic, like an imidacloprid or something like that.
Yeah.
You can knock down insects on the exterior with Towel Star or a contact. You can knock down mites with a miticide. But what you're ultimately saying is, hey, listen, get the tree healthy.
Yeah.
Get the tree healthy, and you shouldn't have those insect-related issues. And honestly, it sounds to me like part of the health is doing this type of pruning, opening them up, allowing air and light circulation, getting the roots healthy, continuing to work on the roots. And this kind of brings me to something that's been hovering in the chat, which is boxwood blight. I'm
surprised it took this long.
No, it was one of the first questions, and I've just been waiting until the time was right to talk about boxwood blight. Are Kingsville susceptible? What is boxwood blight? Is there any cure, hope, treatment, etc.?
I'll start with the back end of that question. Boxwood blight, it was a scary thing. You know, it's sort of it's scary for anybody that's a boxwood lover. Mm-hmm. And so we thought a lot about it. We tried different things. When I traveled with our old one, that, you know, it's my life. If I lost it or, you know, got it injured, it'd kill me. And so to take it someplace, we're going through an environment, especially, it's like one of those things you don't know actually what's causing it. It's a blight. It has a sticky spore. The spore gets spread by contact, by tools. You have a lot of landscapers, pruners. Some of the original culprits that were blamed were wild turkeys carrying it around. So usually gets into a garden and it will annihilate this tree. Very serious. There's no known cure that I know of. I'm kind of always asking, always looking, but no, there's not. The microphyllus, the Asian boxwoods, are the most resistant of any of them. I've heard the Harlan boxwood, the Harlan eye, is totally resistant. I have not seen boxwood blight on any microphylla at all. I've not seen it. Not saying it isn't there, but I've not seen it. And I've looked. You know, I've looked at a lot of them. So if there's any question about whether you have one that you're worried about the blight on, you think, I mean, you look at, it's like having a bad cold or something. When you look up the symptoms, you have them all every day in a sense. You know, you get the scorched leaves, you get any of this problem, you're going to immediately go to the boxwood blight as the culprit. But send some leaves off to one of the extension people and let them really look at it with a microscope, and that's how you're going to get the definitive on whether you got it or not. But I've seen it on what we're seeing it on in our area is the European and the American boxwood.
Yeah.
And, so I've not seen it on any of these yet. Not saying it doesn't happen. I've just not seen it.
Yeah. Is there any, so no known cure though, is what you're saying?
Nah, I don't know of one.
Yeah, general recommendation is destroy the material.
Yeah. Yeah. Burn, baby, burn.
Quarantine it until you confirm via extension agent, and then if it is boxwood blight. In fact, we sent off samples of one of the boxwoods that we were originally talking to you about, and you said, boy, that looks a little suspect, and we sent it off, and when we told Oregon State Extension that we suspected it might be boxwood blight, they were very, very serious about it, very serious about it, and they put it through multiple tests. They asked us to quarantine the tree while they tested. It was a real situation. It came back, it was just a completely benign pathogen, not benign, but it was a pathogen that was a product of the canopy being too dense in the Pacific Northwest wet weather, and just by opening that tree up and pruning it properly and getting it into good soil, it completely rectified the issue.
Yeah, and getting it healthy. You know, that's the thing. And there's another blight that we'll get on boxwoods, but you know, it's not the killer one. It's pretty quickly how fast they'll take them out.
Yeah.
But what we do when we're moving around, this was something that a nurseryman told me, is you're basically using zerothol too, because it's an oxidant. You can spray it every couple hours if you wanted to. It's not going to hurt the tree, but it does destroy the spore. You know, once it gets it into the tree, it's not leaving, but you can kill and knock down the spore.
With Zerotol, which is basically a super high concentration hydrogen peroxide, more or less. Yeah. And you talked about another dwarf boxwood variety that you said you thought was totally resistant, or at least it's purported as totally resistant. What was that variety?
Well, it's not necessarily a dwarf, but they have several of them. But it's a Harlan eye.
Harlan eye.
Yeah, and it's from Asia. It's you know, from, I think a lot of them originally came, or you know, were from Taiwan or that area anyway.
And do you handle them?
That's not politically correct to say that now, but still, but that's where they were coming from. And we've got a few of them that, now you see some that are very dwarf. They have a little bit larger leaves than these. They're corky trunks. That's the draw of them, corky trunks. Not quite as winter hardy, so you almost have to protect them inside if you're in a colder area. But we've got some that are, when I collected them from a nursery, they were about 8 feet tall and about 8 to 12 feet wide. And so big trunks. And it was fun to collect them, still have really not done anything with them.
Yeah. So do they call that the Taiwanese boxwood then, Harlan eye?
Yeah, that's one.
Yeah, so they are less winter hardy and more of a tropical, would you say?
maybe.
Semi-tropical.
Yeah.
We've had this
They-
discussion on Mirai a lot about the Taiwanese boxwood.
The thing is, you know, obviously in the ground in Atlanta, we can get cold. We're 1,000 feet. They're fine in the ground. It's in pot culture, I think, that you have to really protect them.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind speaking to the differences between the Harlandi boxwood and Kingsville?
Oh, that's what we were just talking about. The Harlan boxwood having the corkier bark, but being less winter tolerant.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
The bark doesn't really cause that, but in our area, the one thing about the corkiness I don't like on the box, for one thing, it gives you scale. You know, how far can the tree be away from you and be that corky? And then you see it. But gosh, in our area with the humidity and everything, the moss and the debris, and like with this, you can clean it, you can scrub it off and everything. But with the Harlan boxwood, you get moss in there growing and stuff, and it is hard. It's like a pine tree. You start getting moss on a pine tree, and
you're in
getting
trouble.
it off is just not easy without doing some damage.
Now, do you prune them the same way? Do you handle them the same way? Do they show you the same behavior? Or?
Yeah, they really don't. They're more of an upright grower. You can kind of, I'm not going to prune them to look like a live oak. Mm-hmm. You know, I've not really gotten real comfortable with them in the sense where, you know, it's not like I hate to sound prejudiced, but I like this look better than the Harlan that I found. I mean, that's why I've got these big ones. They got great trunks and everything. Still haven't, you know, I'd rather work on something else rather than those. So it doesn't float my boat, is all I can say.
So Rodney, there's kind of a discussion then, because we're not going to get to see you necessarily realize the finished form of this tonight. Now, maybe over the next few days, as you chip away at this, we might be able to see a form that would be representative of what you were aspiring to create. But for everybody watching,
That's why I tried to kind of do the side that people could really see.
yeah. How do you handle the crown though? Are you going to leave it as one big dome? Are you going to try to create elevation differences? Does it move asymmetrically in one direction or another, or do you feel like the current layout of the branching is as you want it? Like what goes through your head from that perspective?
Great question. That is a great question. Okay. When you look at these trees in nature, and we're looking at the live oak, you look at other trees too with this kind of shape and everything. I call it a complex apex system. And so you'll have this system, and it's not developed yet by the pruning that I've done so far. I spent a lot of time just cleaning this up today. It was frustrating how long it was taking me, but you know, I felt like I had to do it. But each one of these areas, when you go up with a branch like this wide here, this should be, in a way, an independent apex. And it could be a little higher, but there could be a little separation. From the distance, you look at it, and it's an overall silhouette that works together, little indentations here and there. But when you look at it up close, it really should come down to being a little bit of its own apex. And so over here with this branch coming out, it gave itself that feeling to where it's already starting to develop this little apex over here. And so each one of these, you've got this apex, you'll have this apex, and there's a couple in the back. And so over time, those should be developed. And I'll prune to the next few days. I'm not going to let this go. You know that.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to keep pruning, and I'll get it to where it's pretty close to showing that. But
Good.
As it grows, you're editing. This is just the initial. This is a great tree, and it's going to look really good right from the start. But you know, of course, 10 years from now, it's going to look off the charts better. So all the editing just adds up.
Well, we'll put what we'll do is when you know, as far as you can get it over the next 3 days, we'll put the finished, whatever you finish as and feel good about, we'll put that on the end of this in the library so that people can see the finished product of it, because I think it's going to be paramount for people to see your final vision of it.
Yes, it's And it's like you get into a situation like this, it's a lot more. Well, I get a lot more done by talking about it and explaining what I'm going to be doing, because the detail that needs to go in this shouldn't be just cut as fast as you can. I could, I've done it that way where I just take the pruners and I can pretty much just prune to shape, but I'm cutting leaves in half. I'm cutting some branches that maybe I wouldn't have wanted to, but it's hedge cutting it. Mm-hmm. And so this, I would rather go in slowly and do it. So.
And well, let me ask you, is there such a thing as over pruning boxwood? Could you completely defoliate this thing, cut it all back to bare wood and have it grow?
That's a tough question to answer truthfully.
You could. You could, right?
Yeah,
you could cut a boxwood. That's not something you want to do.
Well, one time you got to watch what you ask for. One time we had a lot that were maybe not this thick, but they were this size, and it was like they intimidated people. So in my mind, one day I said, well, I wonder what would happen if I just cut all those boxwoods back. A couple weeks later, a tree from across the lake fell, went across a bunch of bonsai pots, and the top of it slapped all those Kingsvilles. And so right there was the start to cutting them way back. And so now I've got some very fat trunked Kingsvilles that are much more compact, mm-hmm. and it worked fine. They've got so many buds on them, all up and down here. You can cut them way back. I would not recommend cutting past the foliage for somebody that is not prepared to give them the correct aftercare. If the tree's in any way not healthy, that's just a really tough thing to do.
Yep.
I mean, will it work? It more than likely would, but I would not recommend doing that, because what if it doesn't? And
you're talking about broadleaf evergreen having the capacity, like a broadleaf, to be cut back to bare wood and bud, but you also have, I would think, a consideration, especially in the dwarf cultivars of Buxus or Boxwood, how long it's going to take that bud to turn into an actual branch again and start to give you ramification and something that's going to be workable. And it's like you just cut off everything to now have 30 years to grow out secondary, tertiaries again.
That's your answer right there. If you could say it will pop. I mean, it will more than likely, and you could let all these pops come out, then cut back to those, and it's almost a sure thing at that point. But you cut back to this, and you're losing the length, of course, but you're losing all the slow twigging, the taper going into this. It's going to have to regrow that, and it takes a while.
Yeah.
And so it takes a little bit. Not a little bit. It takes the elegance out of the tree.
Yeah.
It makes it a chunky thing. These trees you have to almost prune them to be delicate. They're thick, they're robust, and so when you prune it, open it up correctly, it starts looking like it's floating, like the wind could come through, but you make it chunky, thick, and it just looks like it's stiff, and it's always going to be there, because it is stiff.
Mm-hmm. What kind of pot? Well, let me see. Do you see any angle changes, or do you like it being presented as it is, and then a container? You have any ideas?
Keep putting my tool back up. With the boxwoods especially, I very seldom change the angle of the root system. I do sometimes, but it mainly the angle, that first look of the roots, how they work, how the trunk works, is what I'm doing by spinning it. If I'm going to alter it a little bit, it's just to adjust by the roots. Now, a lot of times we'll take them out of pot culture before we put them into bonsai pots, and so we're cleaning all that duff soil that's collected. It always builds up on top. We're cleaning, we're finding the root system, and it could have been planted funny or whatever, and the root system might be up more like this. then we will change it. And that'll give sometimes real dramatic look to the trunk itself and the top and everything. When you're going to back up to what you were saying about the canopy that's in the apex, you can put a lot of force and a lot of directional movement into these trees. But just say if I wanted to, if we're looking at it and I wanted the eye to come this way, just have this one larger than the rest, and it's going to take the eye out that way. So you can do a lot of directional pruning or by using the apex to do that.
What kind of pot would you put this in?
Well, that's a great question. That's so subjective, it's incredible.
Yep.
It's like my wife and I, Charlie, we have a game and we'll pick out, for a good tree, we're going to pick out our favorite pot for the tree. And sometimes we pick the same pot and fight over this. We don't fight over it, but that's a sure sign that we both agree and it's going to be a good, she's very good at it. But we're going to hold a tree this good. We're going to not really assume that we know the pot that's going to work the best. So if we try one on, it doesn't work good, we're going to go to another one. But I mean, the simple pot for this, and it's so simple that I try to push it to a different pot all the time, would be just an oval, just a shallow oval. You could go as thick as this, you could go a little thinner, you could go deeper, make it easier for yourself. We've put shapes like this, not quite this big, but on stone, or like a stone-like container. So you've got a flat area and it looks like more it's in a field someplace. The moss coming off of it on a stone works fantastic. My old big one's in a elongated rectangle with rounded corners, a real burnished, almost red color to it. The tree jumps out of it. It's a great container for it. So, sometimes you just got to go. I'm not the kind of person, the way my mind works and everything, I don't plan things out to where I'm always knowing the exact container I'm going to put something like this into. I want to kind of play with it a little bit. I want to make sure the tree and the container sing together. But an easy one would be sort of an oval shape. It could be rounded, rectangle, and then you get into what color, what's it going to be, and again, I want to, sometimes we'll put them in a light color, cream color, even white container, and the container goes up and makes the trunk really look larger and everything. Then the foliage really jumps. And then if we go with a darker container, the dark black green is what I call it, kind of matches the foliage so that all the structure in here just really jumps at you. So that looks good.
Yeah.
So,
interesting. That's really, I've never heard anybody describe it like that.
So it just, and what I want to see with this is really not the foliage, although of course you want to see that it's alive and everything. But what's so unique about these guys is all this movement that you're seeing in here. That's why it's important to open it up. I was telling you, Ryan, about that little 7-year-old girl that laid down on the ground, and it was a Kingsville that she looked up into. And it was like, man, I'm going to keep doing that. So, you learn from
Keeping
everybody.
it fresh and young.
Yeah, man, I'll lay down in front of these trees and look up. So I can kind of tell what the beauty is. You can look at it from the top when you're pruning it all you want. You get spots that you pretty much got it. But you lay up underneath and look through it, you can see the spots that need to be edited a little bit more. And so that's a fun way to deal with it.
Do you handle boxwoods that you would be developing branches on, that you would be trying to get more secondary ramification on differently than the way that you're pruning this one? Because it does sound like the pruning in the late fall is how you get good, even distribution of growth next spring. But for a boxwood in development, these ones got crushed, and all of a sudden you're letting them grow. How do you develop a boxwood? In terms of building branches, building secondaries, building stuff? Just let them grow as a bush? Do you thin the bud?
No. If you let them grow as a bush, you're giving them the ability to do what they want. And So you get little hot spots, clusters, you get branches that become more dominant than other ones. And so you kind of want mostly an even growth, then you decide the art of it, where you're putting the negative spaces and all that. And so, opening it up is always good. You have one that's been crushed or you've lost part of it. It's hard to get it to fill back over that spot unless it's popping out from below. That takes forever to grow up and become part of the canopy and look natural, look like it didn't happen. So you can make it show that it actually happened, and that's part of the story. Or you could go in and work it a little differently, but what we'll end up doing is opening it up, clean it to where you're getting all this. You can see there's algae on this. It could be whiter, and I meant to do that today. I got carried away with trying to get it pruned, but I'll do it tomorrow to show how white you can get this just by washing that algae off and dirt and stuff. You can get this really, really white, but you're cleaning it up. They're buds, I can feel them all up and down this thing. So you're cleaning it, you're getting sunlight to it, you're getting the air to it, and then you can cheat a little bit and mix a foliar fertilizer up and fertilize the stems themselves, and that will prompt those buds to pop. Now, I do that in the spring, early spring we'll do it. But you can do it all through the course of the season. You're not going to get a lot of action during the wintertime.
Yeah. And then once those buds start to grow, do you bud select to prioritize the energy into each bud so it grows faster?
This plant, it's a constant with these. They're going to have, in this section here, there'll be 100 little buds sprouting. They'll be just wads of foliage. And so we're always cleaning that out. There's a point where we might want to, on the, find one that you can see, but right here on the outside of a curve or something, we might want to let some of those grow so you have a little incidental serendipity.
Can you point to that where you would want that, just so Jesus can get you?
Right
yes,
there.
So stay right there for us for a second. You got that? Yep. Cool.
Right there. It kind of it break this line up a little bit of a tuft. And you can do that, but you want to get in there. It's going to grow that tuft, but one of them's going to get a little bit stronger, and we'll prune around to where that'll start developing into a branch itself. And pretty quickly, you can get a small secondary branch out. You can't reproduce this, but you can get this to where it's looking like a little branch that's real tight. But the other thing that you're working with a boxwood is over time, you prune this and you got an old tree to begin with. I've had to do it on a lot of really old trees. Is the outside, you're keeping it somewhat consistent, but you're slowly dealing with older and older leaves. And so even though you're taking them out, there's that area that gets tired. And so about every, I'm going to say 20 years, you might have to go in there and prune past this outside edge of foliage. And that's when all these little buds and stuff that are constantly being a nuisance really pay off, because they're there. You let them grow just a little bit, cut to those. Within 2 years, it's grown out to where it looks like nothing's happened, except that your foliage is a robust green. And that's what we're all looking for, is that dark black green foliage.
So it's almost like reinvigorating an azalea, a Satsuki azalea, where they get too woody, not enough water flow. You're saying boxwood will do the same?
Oh yeah. And for me, that's a good comparison with an azalea. Both broadleaf evergreens, kind of treat them. Now we cut azaleas past the foliage pretty easily and all the time, but with boxwoods we're a little bit more careful. But yes, that's exactly what takes place.
And would you wire, and do you wire these Kingsvilles? Like, do you like to wire them, or do you just, how do you handle wiring boxwood?
It's whatever it takes to get there.
Yeah.
And so I have no problems wiring boxwoods. They're very, very thin skinned. They have, the cambium layer is not very thick, so it takes a little bit of manipulation to wire them. If you wire it correctly and everything, your wire is going to stay on there for a long time. If you wire it incorrectly, a lot of damage is done when you wire and you're using the branches of Fulcum. When you're wiring a boxwood and you got that thin skin, if you use the branches of Fulcum and you're damaging the cambium there, you can form that scar tissue that looks really obvious on a boxwood. It's that white color, the scar just jumps. Same thing with if we're getting one of the real white ones. And this might not be as white as some of them, but you get a real white one and you put copper wire on. I love copper. This is not a slap on copper at all. Love it. It holds. They can put a much smaller wire on this to work it. But if it's white and you put the copper wire on and it oxidizes, that stain gets on the plant itself, and it takes years to get it for it to wash off.
Yeah, it makes sense.
It's amazing. So we do a lot with wire, yes, but we do a lot with just pruning, just clip and grow. We'll cable things. So say you want to, pull this around, pull this down. You can cable these together quite nicely. It just makes it brittle. So you hit that piece of copper wire that's holding it together, your guide wire, it easily could break the branch that it's holding. So, and they disappear. And again, they're on there for a long time. It takes a long time. Sometimes it doesn't set the branch. So it's just one of those things when you're showing it, when you want to look good, you've got it on. It might not take. We did a lot of experimentation at one point where we were taking a triangle-shaped chisel and coming on the bottom of the branch and cutting a groove out and then wiring. And our theory was that groove would form more scar tissue under the branch and hold it in place more. But it didn't work as well as I wanted to because it was really hard to do. And so we went other ways, of course. But it was that's the kind of thing you're trying to experiment with these on. We have done some with gins and charies, and it looks great. But that wood does rot after a while. There's no question about it.
So basically, as far as follow-up work, you're going to continue, and you call it leaf pruning, but you're shortening the strong, elongated, fleshy green shoots at the tip, and then you'll be shoot selecting down to twos, and you're going to do that across this entire tree, and that is a solid, thorough late fall working.
Yes. Well, if this tree was a very refined tree, for instance, the tree that we showed 2 years in a row, I spent about 2 weeks, 5 hours a day, because it gets to you mentally, just doing little bits of nipping here and there. But mostly it was a leaf selection thing where I was actually cutting back in places to stem where I might cut off 2 leaves to 10 leaves. But then I'm also cutting a leaf off. And so I'll go in with a thin pair of scissors and go in and take leaves out. And so, you can adjust a lot of the look just by taking leaves out. And, of course, guess what? You take the big ones out, and that really helps the overall look of the tree. So you can equalize the size of the leaf, taking the big ones out, making the smaller ones be the substantial number of leaves, and the tree looks further and further away. So that's what I mean by leaf pruning is really individual leaves. But, directional, even with the leaves, you have one coming down, might take that one leaf off. But now that is for show. And I'm not saying I would do that just as fall maintenance, but we're going to edit to past this point for fall maintenance. So where you get to where the light does get in. So we want those buds popping out all over, and they will pop out all over, and you'll be coming in with, sometimes we'll use a tweezer, sometimes chopsticks, sometimes just the fingers if you catch them at the right time, and rub most of those off, leaving just where we want to see them.
What else you got for us, Rodney? You feeling like you gave us the business?
Well, there's always more to anything. And so I'll put it this way. This has been a pleasure working on this tree, let me tell you. It's kicked my butt today. So that's been fun. Now, I want to see this tree. Of course, it's perched right now in this soil. The height of this compared to the container, it's going to look a little bit better with it being back, where it's more like this, obviously, But it's working great. It's got good drainage. I love wooden boxes. But there's just, it's a great tree. It just needs to be slowly exposed. And again, you can only do so much in a day before it really gets your eyes crossing and stuff like that. And so this tree, in the next couple of days, will go a long way.
Can you go ahead and just give us a slow rotation of the tree 2 or 3 times so we can take in the full scope? I think it'll help people see the work you've done from different perspectives. It'll show the unworked parts that you're going to be tackling over the next few days.
I will, and I'll put it this way too. And I will be turning it and doing that. But what I'm going to do is just visually, I'm going to open up what I consider the front. I'm going to really look at it with fresh eyes tomorrow. But I'm going to open the front up to where I can see in really nicely. The front will be a little tighter also, and the sides will be a little wider, but they'll be open also. The top, especially the front, but the very top, because they're more lateral dominant, I'm going to leave a little bit, but I'm going to really open that up just a little bit more. Then the back, I'm going to leave a lot more on the back to stop the eye. So when you're looking through this, the back of the tree will have more foliage so that it stops and you see all the twigging and everything. It acts like a screen, like you're taking a photograph of a bonsai and you put a black screen behind it, what that does depth-wise.
That's really nice to hear your thoughts on that. And then, so just give us some turns as I ask you some questions so everybody can see it. There's a lot of discussion about boxwoods flowering. Any ornamental value to their flowers on boxwoods?
They're so incidental, it's incredible. Most people don't notice it. The fruit itself it matches the leaf so much. Most people don't notice that. If you want a flowering boxwood, go to the Harlan. They flower with white flowers. It's really showy.
Gotcha.
They have a lot of fruit. This is going into a different mutation right here.
And then as far as if you do experiment with the formation of deadwood on boxwood to try and preserve it, especially trunks die on boxwood, especially coming out of big, huge cuts. So they're coming out of hedges or something like that, and you have dead sections. And that, how would you preserve that to the best of your ability? You talked about lime silver mixed with some sumi to take down that bright white to a more realistic gray. But how would you preserve the deadwood knowing that it will eventually rot?
Well, okay, I'll tell you what, all I can answer that is with what we've done. And that basically is here's the fine line to it. What you want the deadwood, and where some of the junipers out in your garden work so well, when the deadwood is legitimate deadwood, that's just incredible. You can't carve that. It's all the checking, the splitting, all that flaking as the wood dries and gets hit by the weather conditions and everything. Well, that's what you're wanting on this also. So it's a progression. You're watching it, you're letting it do that. We might barely carve a little bit. Once we start seeing the grain splitting, we might get that going a little quicker. But it's very hard. We end up using that little spray gun going in and washing the soft wood out, leaving the harder wood. That ends up looking more natural. So we'll do that a lot. But you got to get it to the checking that you want to see. You've got to get it to the color that you want to see it, and then you can seal it. But the wood preservative, that's going to fail too, because the water gets around it, behind it, and so then you end up with almost like you painted it on, and it's the outside skin is structurally strong, and some of it that's soaked in is, but it's going to rot behind it. So that's temporary. We've really just enjoyed it for the years that it's going to be on there,
Yeah.
and then go to the next step, which is when it's not there and you've got more shari and everything. So it's a progression, of you have deadwood. Say you left a whole branch and it's dead. Well, that died 10 years ago. The shorter it gets, the more checking it gets, the longer it goes back in history. But sooner or later, no matter what it is, it's going to fall off to the trunk and go down there. That's where it's really old. So
Next iteration of age.
So, why not just enjoy the whole journey as it's going? But so we've quit doing a lot of the preservatives and stuff like that because it's going to fail. I mean, it's like it's going to be artificial at some point. It's going to look artificial. If you're looking close enough to see the artificial part, then it is. I mean, I've seen people even I've seen where you have a dead wood on a tree that's just been done, and somebody will even paint just the front half that you're seeing. I mean, that's how you can do it, but at the same time, why not enjoy it as a real event? So killing the branch, sometimes it happens naturally, sometimes like you were saying in a hedge, that's one thing, but enjoy that progression of age, and you can sort of accelerate that if you want to.
When on the backside
we
here,
did here.
Yeah, I know. That looks nice. Will you rotate it one more time? And when you get to the backside where that reversion or that sport is taking place, I want to talk to you about that a little bit. So when you get this kind of formation of a larger, coarser growth, if you let that grow, will it stay that same size, or will those leaves shrink? Do you run the risk, like on an azalea, where you could actually, leaving a dominant flower over a subordinate flower, cause that branch to fully revert? Like, does that happen?
Absolutely. Every once in a while, we've seen a strong runner go out and then go back to small foliage. Every once in a while. And I'm going to say 99 times out of 100, that does not happen. So this will run out. And so every once in a while, what we'll do is say you've got a branch you want to thicken up. We'll let it run on that branch and thicken it up and then remove it. It will take over. There's some trees that we'll see that the sport to this sport, the mutating, will be so similar to this at first, you overlook it. And then slowly it starts changing the growth habit, the color of the bark, just little subtle things, but all of a sudden it pops out that it's different. Well, it's gotten strong. Some of these ones that are very strong can take over your tree. And so the little tiny growth you can see way back in there, but it will change the dynamics of it. Some of the ones we've seen, trunks will get this big, but that's the sport. And so you might have just a little bit of foliage that's the original dwarf Kingsville foliage on that.
So how do you know the difference between a sport and what you're calling a hot spot?
Well, when I'm calling something a hot spot, and I use it on other plants also, but that's just a really vigorous spot. And so
the leaves would still be small, though?
They could be small, just like, for instance, maybe you're not turning it enough, maybe just one for various reasons is stronger than another area. And so it could be a hot spot where the growth is going towards it. The Kingsville's a sport of mutation, so it continues to mutate, but that's a little different. I wouldn't,
that's
call
not a
this
hot spot
to me.
That's a
that's
reversion.
Semantics, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to kick out. And again, you can't get a bigger trunk any quicker than letting one of those run for a little while and then remove it. But you got to go back in there, and it's like you see it on a lot of trees where if you don't get it all, it's going to keep shooting out. Then it gets to be a wad. Then it gets to be a spot that is always going to show, and you have to remove the branch or a larger part of it. But that's no big deal. That's just cutting it off, you can see it stops right here.
Yeah, hold that for a second. Just show us where that stops so we can see that transition.
It stops right there.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Yeah, show us that cut. That's perfect.
So I'm going to come in and.
You need him to wait for a sec, Jesus? Hold one
Sure.
sec, Rodney, and just let him see that, because this
So-
is super interesting.
I'm going to move that part. So you see, on a Kingsville, it would be even more obvious. So it would be okay to maybe cut there. But the safest way where you're going to also make the art better is to go in and cut. Now I've got to do it to where I can see it. But I'm going to cut all the way to where I don't have that stop. So this would have been kind of okay to do, and probably the foliage difference, you can kind of see the difference, the size-wise, the vigor. See how much even, this doesn't show it well, but how this is straight. This one's got a little bit more movement. But you take it off, you take it back to where, now I've lost the spot even, but you take it back to where the old growth is, and you take it all the way to that branch, then it's going to look more natural as it grows out. Obviously, I can't find it unless I really look, but and it works very nicely. If you leave that stub, you got a percentage of chance that it's going to continue to pop out there if you didn't get it all. So you got other ones. This spot here looks a little suspect. So, you know, they just, some of the trees, if you let them go for a little while, you get just a mix of foliage, and sometimes that's okay, and sometimes the foliage shapes and everything are so consistent or close enough that it doesn't matter. But it does, you know, the longer, the older it gets, the more you see the difference. And you know, the shape of the Kingsville leaf is a little bit shorter, blunter, darker, and more rounded, and it dips a little bit. So you want that kind of same similarity all over the tree, where you get into a leaf like this, and it has a little bit of a roll, but it doesn't have that curl, and so it really does not match the other Kingsville look. Where
so that's a reversion too? That's a sport?
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting.
So this tree's got several on it. Some of the other ones I saw have multiple ones. We've got the same thing. We used to take more cuttings than we do now. And so we would, I mean, the sports would be what you would cut off because they're growing faster and they're out of scale and out of line, out of the silhouette. So you cut those off, root them. And it was amazing. We probably, if I counted the difference of the sports, we probably had 7 that off different trees, but would have the same tendency that you could. We had one we called curly locks, and we potted those up, and they sold because they a little bit yellow foliage, yellower than this, but they had the curled leaf that was almost contorted. People loved them, but you know it's you know sort of kind of selling of something you don't really stand behind very well. I couldn't handle it. But you've got, we would put those together, and it was like this, they grew faster and all that, but still, I mean, the Kingsville, the microphylla that looks good and tight, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
So we throw those cuttings away now.
You're you are in so deep with Kingsville and understanding that nuance that you're actually crazy enough to go in and prune leaf by leaf to get that aesthetic. That's pretty profound, man.
You get carried away when with life sometimes. But you know, it makes a difference. In the end, all those little nuances. We're doing bonsai for what reason?
Yeah.
You know, we're trying to get there, and so. With every species of plant, there's little things that make a big difference. And so over time, the more you keep it consistent, the more you've got this certain look to it, it just gets better and better. If you let it get carried away, it starts looking sloppy. I see some that look sloppy to me, but that's prejudice on my part, but still, you know, when you see, luckily working on Father Paul's tree, the quality of that tree just jumps off the face of the earth. For a boxwood, the tiny leaves, the white trunk, the undulation, the neat movement that you're seeing with this, but even accelerated. It's just hard to beat that. So, you know, you've got these classes of boxwood. You know, is one better than another? Well, it is to me. And so that makes a difference. It's worth doing all the work on certain ones. We don't go to that depth on every one every year. But the beauty is you do it for 1 year and it will last for a while. You don't have to do it every year.
Oh, okay.
They grow slow. I mean, the tiniest ones, maybe a ½ inch a year of growth. That's not much. And so you can keep that under control just with a prune here or there. And when you're walking by it, watering and stuff, and go on that intense work, you know, you spread it out. You do certain trees. Of course, you're doing the more your special trees, the ones that mean the most to you. You're doing more often. But
I've always thought, in terms of the bonsai practice, the nuance that Japan really embraced and that I think the rest of the world is having a hard time catching up with is the intricate knowledge of the species to the degree where you would understand when you go to an exhibition the level and the degree to which somebody has mastered the nuances of that species and really brought out the finest level of craft as well as artistry. And these are things that are missed. You know, what does it mean to have a good shimpaku juniper? How do you show age in a tree that naturally mounds, or a procumbens? Right. You know, what you're talking about right now is your eye and your ability to understand the nuances of the highest level of, you know, Japonica macrophylla, Kingsville, or sort of across the range of boxwoods, you would have a higher appreciation and expect more out of a boxwood that would be a show-winning tree than anybody else in the country, to be sure. And so it's nice to be, as a bonsai professional, I'm always trying to enhance my ability to understand those nuances so that when I look at boxwood, I can look at boxwood with a more educated, discerning eye. I can practice on boxwood with a far higher degree of craft and understanding. This is very enlightening to see you work and talk about these things.
You know, one thing that happened with me, and I think this is across the board, one way you could look at what you were just talking about is I started out in bonsai. You know, bonsai back in the day when I was getting started close to 50 years ago, it wasn't that good. It's gotten a lot better. So when you go to a show and now you see the trees that are being showed, just starting into bonsai, you've already got an accelerated education on what that bonsai, what that tree is all about. I was lucky. When I was 17 years old, I was sitting right in front of every day helping somebody work on a tree that was outstanding as a boxwood. You know, it was one of the top ones I've ever seen still. And I still get to work on it. It's great, but that tree's fantastic. Well, that tree, okay, I didn't build up to that. I started there.
Yeah, baseline.
Yeah.
Yep. That's the elevation of level right there.
Yeah.
Is when your baseline is the maximum quality of the previous generation, and that's your version of where it is to start.
Yeah.
That's how bonsai and the art form progresses.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, very cool, Rodney. I don't know, did we miss any other question? I feel like we pretty much...
We covered a lot.
I knew it was gonna happen. Rodney's like, I think I'll just talk about pruning a little bit and maybe some, design. And the chat will pull it out of you.
Yeah, the chat's been having fun.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Really appreciating it.
Sure, it's been great. And again, you can't, this tree, as soon as I saw it, it was like, oh gosh, what a challenge. Well, I even underestimated how much of a challenge it is. There's a lot of mass here, biomass in this tree. And don't want to mess it up. And, you know, I definitely worked to the point where I started feeling like I was, okay, I'm pushing it. I'm trying to take off too much at once and stuff. It's not a good way to do bonsai. So it's good to slow down. The talk was great because I did slow down, was able to talk instead of kept pruning and maybe making a mistake. But no mistakes have been made in the sense where, you know, I'll sleep tonight, get up, and since nobody will be here in the morning, but I'll get right back on it.
Come on down and do your thing. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
What better lesson, though, too, and just as bonsai as a practice, when you say, listen, enough is enough, and this is super intense scope of work, and you want to do it well, and, you know, the information you gave us is just as valuable as watching you do, you know, pruning 3,000
Well, good.
branches the same way. So thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, very good.
And it is a progression. You're doing the same thing over and over again, but still.
We did it.
All right. Well,
Thank
thanks,
you, Rodney.
everybody.
Appreciate it. Yeah. I guess
Yeah, we'll see you at the live Q&A.
live Q&A Thursday. We're going to be
Thursday, 10 a.m.
Thursday, 10 a.m.
And there are still slots in the forum.
There we go.
So throw us your questions and your
All right.
photos.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Rodney.
Sure.
All right.
Thank you.
Signing out.
Yeah.